This is Jamie, and welcome to my new channel, History Hiccups. Today we're going to be talking about the investigative journalist Nellie Bly. And this is on biography.com, and it's by Barbara Maranzani. Maranzani. Okay, hope y'all enjoy. Nellie Bly, born Elizabeth Jane Cochran on May 5th, 1864, died January 27th, 1992. In 1887, 23-year-old reporter Nellie Bly had herself committed to a New York City asylum to expose the horrific conditions of the 19th century mental patients. Born Elizabeth Jane Cochran in May 1864 in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Nellie Bly launched her journalistic career early. In 1885, at the age of 21, she penned an anonymous response to a misogynistic newspaper article in a local newspaper, the Pittsburgh Dispatch. The paper's publisher, impressed by the letter's moxie, asked the author to reveal his or her identity. Cochran was soon writing for the Dispatch, and following the tradition of the time, adopted a pseudonym pen name. She chose Nellie Bly, a character in a popular song by composer Stephen Foster. Bly worked as an investigative reporter for the Dispatch, focusing primarily on women's issues. She then spent 6 months traveling in Mexico, exposing life under dictator Porfirio Diaz. In 1887, she moved to New York, where it took her months to land her next job. At the New York World, the World, published by Joseph Pulitzer, specialized in sensationalistic and lurid stories that made it one of the most highly circulated papers of its day. But it also published hard-hitting investigative pieces, a perfect fit for Bly. She went to great lengths to plan her undercover stunt. Just 23, Bly was now one of a handful of female reporters in New York City determined to make her mark. She accepted an unusual and dangerous assignment. For years, rumors had swirled about conditions in one of the city's most notorious places, the insane asylum, on Blackwell's Island, now known as Roosevelt Island. Blackwell's was home to a number of public institutions, including a penitentiary, a poorhouse, hospitals for infectious diseases like smallpox, and the asylum. Excuse me. Bly's editor suggested she have herself committed to the asylum for 10 days to expose the real conditions, and Bly immediately agreed. Working under an assumed name, she took a room in a boarding house and set out to prove herself insane. She wandered the halls and nearby streets, refused to sleep, ranted and yelled incoherently, and even practiced looking crazed in her mirror. Within days, the boarding house owners summoned the police. Bly now claimed to be a Cuban immigrant, suffering from amnesia. A perplexed judge sent Bly to Bellevue Hospital, where she got a taste of the suffering to come. As hospital inmates were forced to eat spoiled food and live in squalid conditions. I guess they called their patients inmates back then, and then they called them patients. Now they call them clients. They're clients now. Okay. When Bly was diagnosed with dementia and other psychological illnesses, she was sent by ferry to Blackwell's Island in the East River. Conditions in the asylum were worse than she had imagined. Originally built to hold 1,000 patients, Blackwell was cramming more than 1,600 people into the asylum when Bly arrived in the fall of 1887. Extensive budget cuts had led to a sharp decline in patient care, leaving just 16 doctors on staff. But most disturbing of all, the prevailing wisdom of the age regarding both the causes of mental illness and how patients should be treated. Asylums like Blackwell's were considered curiosities, where thrill seekers like Charles Dickens and others could visit those thought mad. Doctors and staff with little training, and in many cases little compassion, ordered harsh and brutal treatments that did little to heal and much to harm. They kind of still do sometimes, especially with the medications. Those medications, whew. But they are to help people. They are to help some people. Some people need a little more than others, but it's still, when you come off of them, I mean, your whole system is messed up. I mean, your reflexes, your ability to judge distances, you're just all over the place when you come off of them. And you have to work to get back to where you want to be. But anyway, Bly quickly befriended her fellow inmates, who revealed rampant psychological and physical abuse. Patients were forced to take ice-cold baths and remain in wet clothes for hours, leading to frequent illnesses. They were forced to sit still on benches without speaking or moving for stints lasting 12 hours or more. Some patients were tethered together with ropes and forced to pull carts around like mules. Food and sanitary conditions were horrific, with rotten meat, moldy, stale bread, and frequently contaminated water dished out. Those who complained or resisted were beaten. And Bly even spoke of the threat of sexual violence by vicious, tyrannical staffers. Bly was shocked to discover that many of the inmates were not insane at all. They were recent immigrants, mostly women, caught up in a law enforcement system in which they were unable to communicate. Others that Bly met at Blackwell's and Bellevue Hospital before had fallen through the cracks of a society with few social safety nets, ending up committed simply for being poor with no family to support them. To her horror, Bly quickly realized that while many of these inmates were not suffering from mental illness before they arrived at the asylum, their treatments inflicted grave psychological damage on them. That's what I'm talking about, medications and stuff, especially if you've been on them for years and years, and different doses and different kinds of medications for years and years, and then come off of them. But if you come off of them, you got to come off of them the right way, because if you don't, and I'm speaking from experience, if you stop a medication you've been on for years, especially those psychotropic drugs, you're going to end up in the hospital in the emergency room, intensive care, unable to move, going through withdrawals, and your kidneys and your body shutting down. That happened to me. I was dumb and stop my medication without a doctor, okay? And I ended up in the ICU with my insides shutting down, and they had to go. My doctor didn't know the antidote for the medication I was taking. So he had to call around the country to get that antidote to give to me. Finally he did, and he saved my life. And I'll always be grateful to him. And he's dead now, but I'm grateful that he did. Anyway, okay, where was I? Okay. Bly's expose had immediate results. Bly's cover was nearly blown by a fellow reporter, but she was able to stick it out for 10 days before her editor arranged for her release. Her first articles on her experiences were published within days, and the series became a publishing sensation. A month after Bly's articles were published, a grand jury panel visited the asylum to investigate. Unfortunately, the hospital and its staff had been tipped off in advance. By the time the jury members arrived, the asylum had cleaned up its act, literally. Many of the inmates who had provided Bly with details of their horrific treatment had been released or transferred. The staff denied Bly's accounts. Fresh food and water had been brought in, and the asylum itself had been scrubbed down. Despite this effort at a cover-up, the grand jury agreed with Bly. A bill that was already under consideration, which would increase funding for mental institutions, was pushed through, adding nearly $1 million, $24 million in today's money, to the departmental budget. Abusive staff members were made to the system to help prevent those who did not actually suffer from mental illness from being committed. Her time in the Madhouse helped launch Bly's career. Bly quickly became a household name and one of the most famous journalists in the world. Just 2 years after her Madhouse expose, she made headlines again when she recreated the trip depicted in the book Around the World in 80 Days, circumnavigating the globe by herself and beating the record by a week. Bly retired from journalism following her marriage to a wealthy businessman. She later returned to writing, including a stint as a foreign correspondent during World War I, until her death in 1922. Bly's exploits and achievements became the subject of books, plays, and a Broadway musical. Her history-making trip was even immortalized in a popular board game released in 1890, which allowed players to travel around the world with the intrepid, audacious reporter. All right, hope y'all enjoyed, and thank you for watching. Bye.